Bill has served New Zealand in the National Party since his election to Parliament in 1990. Born in Lumsden in 1961 and educated at St Patrick's College Silverstream, he studied economics at the University of Otago and English literature at Victoria. He went on to work as a treasury analyst before returning to the family farm in Dipton and standing in the seat today known as Clutha Southland was called Wallace, a post he held until his decision in 2014 to stand as a list MP only. He is the Prime Minister. He has been the Minister of Finance, Health, Housing New Zealand, Revenue, Infrastructure, and the spokesperson for Finance and Education while in opposition. Now, Bill and Mary have 6 children, aged 29 to 17, and they've just celebrated their 30th wedding anniversary. That's right. And we have a photo. I don't know if you can see. Does that bring back memories?
It does.
Very nice. And I accessed your maiden speech online, and I just want to quote from it. It says this: I come to the house, this is back in 1990, I come to the house with a conscience formed by a Christian upbringing, by values that no doubt I shall struggle to maintain, but most important, I come with the blessing and support of my family. When the people who elected me and the people who support me come to make their judgment, they will ask some questions that are not mine, but are searching. They will ask, was he a man of courage? Was he a man of judgment? Was he a man of integrity who never ran out on the principles he believed in or the people who believed in him? Was he a man who understood the trust of those whose hopes he carried? And was he a man devoted to serving the public interest and not compromised by any private obligation? Mr. English, we really appreciate you being here. We know you have a very busy schedule, a long phone call in the car I hear in the car park just before you came in. I do just want to tell one very quick story which I read in the doctor's waiting room in the Women's Weekly, just to reassure you that I don't subscribe to it. But it was on the birth of your first child, Luke. And Mr. English says, I was cycling down the Kilburnie Hill and had a pretty serious crash into a bus. I was lying in the middle of the road and the woman in the local hairdresser recognised me and rang my wife Mary, who was 3 or 4 blocks away at home. By the time she got there, the ambulance was there and we went into hospital and things didn't go well, so she had to help treat me a bit because Mary is a doctor. Then Mary's waters broke. And she went into labour. The only time she's been allowed into labour, isn't it? Yes.
6 times.
Yeah, 6 times. I was stitched up in the head and the legs, this is Bill speaking, and then put in a bed and wheeled over to the maternity ward. I was drugged up with painkillers and didn't really understand what was going on. So I was encouraging Mary to stick with her plan of having no painkillers. I couldn't put up with the pain, but I was expecting her to. And that was Luke. And suffice to say, Mary wasn't impressed. Mr. English, we thank you for your time this morning, as I said, and I think probably this morning we're going to ask some questions that you may never get asked again on the election campaign, which might be a good thing, might not be a good thing. And we're specifically keen to know just about where you stand, especially on some of the personal beliefs and some of the moral conscience issues that are coming up. But I think just as a general question, as a family person with children, what's your greatest concern around families? What's your greatest priorities in supporting families and parents at the moment?
I think my greatest concern is for those, particularly those children who miss out on the benefits of structured household, learning some norms of behaviour and respect, and the benefits of committed adults who do all that with them. We have thousands of kids for whom daily life is chaotic, scary, unguided, and has a lifelong impact on them. And so that's quite a strong focus for me, because I think with people who had the experience of family, even a less than perfect experience, which I think is probably most people's experience of family, it's sufficiently positive and reinforcing that they try to maintain that. For those who haven't had the experience, they don't know what it could be, and often the way that government interacts with our most complex households probably makes them worse, not better. So we have to develop a better understanding of how that should work. So that's probably my main concern. I'm not one who believes that there's the family these days is the victim of larger forces. I think it's a self-reinforcing institution which changes a bit over time and is going to outlast others.
So do you think families need more government or less government?
Generally less, actually. Government's there to support them, but there's a whole lot of aspects of family that government can't buy, and buying things is kind of what government's best at. I mean, it can't buy love and trust and relationship and direction for families, and you shouldn't expect it to. I think we've all these days got a bit of a more humble understanding of what government is capable of doing, and I think a better understanding and growing understanding of what families and communities and other collective enterprises, churches, iwi, what they can do to support, because governments have for a long time tried to compensate where there isn't family structure and have done a pretty poor job of it. Okay,
let's come back to that. Can we cover a few issues? And we've provided these questions in advance, so there's no surprise questions in this list. In your first media conference as Prime Minister, when you were asked about abortion or the topic came up, you said, "My views are pretty well known," and that is that you oppose decriminalisation of abortion. Would that be a fair thing to say?
Yes, that's right.
And look, we thank you for that strong stance, because it's quite refreshing coming out of Parliament, because there's a very strong voice to say, look, it's just a woman's choice, it's got none of our business, it's between her and a doctor. We saw that on the news during the week. What's your response? Do you think the law actually needs to be tightened up rather than decriminalised and liberalised?
Well, the law may, if the law influenced decisions in that way, then I personally would prefer at least the current law administered in the way that was intended. But look, after a long time in Parliament, the law generally, not always, but generally will end up reflecting the broader preferences of the community. Parliamentarians have a role in the debate that goes with shaping the law, but most people have a different view than I do about abortion. I think that's reflected not just in the law, but also in the sort of practice of it. So as our community preferences change, then maybe the law might change. The fact is, abortion rates have been dropping, which I think is a good thing. Certainly think it's a good thing. And who knows in time what social attitudes might be. But in the meantime, the law is how it is. We're not proposing to change it.
So in 2011, the Court of Appeal said that the unborn child doesn't have a right to life. Do you think the law should say that an unborn child has a right to life?
Well, that's my view. I don't see that the Parliament's going to shift that. I think simply because it wouldn't want to contemplate the implications of that.
So it's a numbers game, really?
Well, I mean, the law is all about majorities and community preferences, and that hasn't changed in a long time.
Germany, France, Belgium, Uruguay, 38 American states have improved their abortion law by introducing informed consent, about informing women about the risks and alternatives, to make sure there's no coercion, the boyfriend pressuring to get the abortion. Would you personally support a bill like that?
Well, if it was going to change the current framework, then subject to what's actually in it, I'm always interested in measures that would ensure that the people who make the decisions are making it on a sound basis. We have informed consent in New Zealand, though the requirements around informed consent are fairly significant across all medical procedures. I think the reality is, in the case of the abortion law, that it's quite difficult to find someone who would take up the issue in a legal way to contest whether consent was informed. But certainly, under New Zealand law, people are meant to be giving fully informed consent.
But when you were Minister of Health, you butted your heads a little bit, didn't you, trying to get better information to women?
Yeah, that was, I think, a discussion at the time over whether a government publication should include pictures of a fetus, which I think these days would be regarded as quite acceptable and normal. In those times was seen as, symbolic of essentially a particular view about abortion. But I think things have moved on. I mean, the accessibility and clarity of modern imaging means that I don't think anyone can say they don't know that much about the presence or development of a fetus.
Parental notification, you voted for parental notification for parents being told if their teenager was pregnant and considering an abortion. In 2004 you voted for it. A petition came before a select committee last year by Hilary Kieft, whose daughter was sneaked off for an abortion. And the National Party voted against that petition proceeding or responding to it. Do you support that decision? I mean, well, firstly, do you still support parental notification?
I do, yes.
So why did the National Party reject that petition in an attempt to change the law?
Well, the petition isn't, well, in the first case there'll be some procedural issues about what exactly you do with a petition. But look, the members of the committee would be, they vote the way they vote. There wouldn't be a party position on it. No. But certainly my view hasn't changed.
Surrogacy, just before we move off this area of bioethics and abortion, the European Parliament in 2015 condemned surrogacy, the practice of surrogacy, which undermines the human dignity of the woman since her body and its reproductive functions are used as a commodity. Do you oppose legalisation of surrogacy?
Well, I don't exactly understand what the law is here. This appears to be surrogacy type arrangements that go on. New Zealand hasn't really debated them. Look, I think I'd take the same view as most people, and that is, we don't want to see industrial reproduction, and certainly not of some sort that's certified or underpinned by government. However, life is messy for a lot of people, and in different circumstances they'll come to arrangements that are not covered by the law or haven't been contemplated. The question there is, whether you have a law that in some way punishes them or not, and that's difficult because there's a child involved regardless of how that child came into existence. So I think the laws in New Zealand, as I understand it at least, is probably about right in the sense of not encouraging on the one hand or being heavily punitive on the other. I mean, with these issues, you can always they often are very difficult to resolve in principle. In principle, surrogacy deprives children of the sort of life with their biological parents. In practice, people are trying to find solutions when they're desperate, when they've, for reasons that may be good or not good reasons, are unable to have their own children. And so the law is always a bit about how much tolerance of the humanity and messiness of life is accommodated, and how much you're still trying to maintain a direction and structure, particularly for children who don't have a role in these debates, who aren't part of making the law, but live with the consequences of adult decisions.
And just finally, in this area of stem cell research, there's adult stem cell research and there's embryonic stem cell research. I'm assuming with your pro-life views you'd be opposed to embryonic stem cell research?
Yes, and I think that quite pretty broad opposition to that has pushed research in the direction of adult stem cell usage. Again, I think most people would find a kind of industrial process around embryonic stem cell research repugnant. There are medical benefits, although the claims for them always seem to be way out in front. They never quite arrive. Nevertheless, there's now there is a focus on adult stem cell usage, and that's much more acceptable from my point of view.
Another hot topic in Parliament at the moment, of course, is euthanasia. And at your first media conference as Prime Minister, once again, you said your views are pretty well known, that you would oppose decriminalisation of euthanasia. Do you think there could ever be safeguards in place that would make you think otherwise? Do you think there's such a thing as safeguards for euthanasia?
No, I don't think you can make them adequate. People will try, I think, with the best of intent to construct safeguards. But, look, I've got a couple of reasons why I oppose it. One is simply protection of the vulnerable. We have a law that says you can't kill. And what it actually means is if you do kill someone, because the law doesn't stop people doing it, you're subject to that being scrutinised around intent. And to cross that line gets you into all sorts of challenging situations. So protection, that's there to protect the vulnerable and make our actions able to be scrutinised. And I think the second thing is this idea that the value of my life is all about my choice about it. Well, actually, I've found in life part of your role as a friend and a family member is to remind people about the value of their life, which is not about how they feel. It's how the rest of us feel and the objective value of it.
And so in terms of, part of the solution is good hospice movement, good palliative care, isn't it? I know that you've moved some way towards this in terms of full public health resourcing of, for example, hospices and palliative care. Is that something you'd like to see continue in that direction? I guess the question is, how much is the state responsible for that? I've got a hospice just down the road from me, and they're often having fundraising. And, is it up to them to fundraise, or as a state, should we be saying people at that point in their life deserve state support?
Well, it's changed a long way from, 15, 20 years ago when there was a couple of hospices in New Zealand, and now they're 70 or 80 or 60 or 70% funded, I think. So over the years, the extent of state funding has grown considerably, and I think it's increasingly accepted in our mainstream medical system that palliative care should be a normal part, not an exceptional service. I think it would be important, though, for the hospice movement to always keep that element of community support and care. If they become, it's like a lot of organisations, if they become 100% government funded, they can lose some of the special motivations. In the case of hospices, the quite significant volunteer input that goes with it, which I think in the experiences I've had with it bring a kind of warmth to it that that could be lost. So I think it's important that there's enough state funding, government funding, that these are sustainable services accessible to everyone who needs them, but not so much that they become a wholly government service.
I don't know if you've noticed a smoke haze around Parliament this week, but there's been a drug symposium going on. A very strong push for decriminalisation of marijuana. I read an article this morning on the Stuff website which said that they were struggling to find people defending the status quo, opposing decriminalisation of marijuana. Two of them happened to be you and I, standing in the gap.
Okay.
The argument is that it's not a criminal issue, it should be a health issue. Why should we lock up people who have a joint? Actually, marijuana is not that bad. They could be on worse. What's your response to that? Because my argument is that it's both criminal and health, that criminal sends a societal message, but we need to offer the health, we need to give the addiction services, we need to help people out of it. Is that where you're coming from?
And that's what we have at the moment, which is the product of, debate that's gone on, certainly since I've been in Parliament, almost 3 decades. So while this discussion's going on, I think it's important to be open to different approaches that may lead to better results. That is, fewer people whose lives are harmed by the drugs. Every time we've had that debate, though, in the past, we've come to the same kind of conclusion, which is that the harm from these drugs can be enormous, can wreck lives, and generally does, often does. They often do. And so the current law is they remain illegal drugs, marijuana or P or any number of the other Class A drugs and so on. And I just think the case needs to be a bit more compelling than saying a bit more compelling than some people who just say, well, now we don't quite care anymore. Well, for the family with the 17-year-old who's smoked too much dope and having that mixed in with, say, some kind of psychosis, they don't want more of it. They don't want more other people affected by it. So you have at the moment countries around the world that are trying different ways of dealing with marijuana. Well, let's see how it goes. In the meantime, though, the position in New Zealand is clear. It's not just a matter of my opinion or your opinion. It happens to be the law as passed by Parliament and debated many times. I think there are some pretty challenging issues these days, particularly with methamphetamines. Just a couple of weeks ago, I was with a couple of dozen recovering meth addicts, and some of their stories about the impact on their lives, well, all of their stories, I didn't get to hear all of them, but the ones I did, the impact on their lives and those around them over quite extended periods of addiction were just enormous. And we have had to ramp up considerably the treatment services. Now, I think that's dealing with some people who weren't getting treatment before but are now. The good news is that, in this big group of people, most of them were getting out of it, which is fantastic. I mean, it's worth the effort if it changes one life.
So there is a bill currently might come up for vote before the election on medicinal marijuana, Julianne Genter from the Green Party. In my view, the government seems to be taking a cautious but responsible approach to medicinal marijuana based on research, based on ministry input, non-smoked, controlled. But where does National stand? Because I know that National could kill that bill just by voting against that medicinal marijuana bill, because that bill is basically smoke dope in your backyard. In fact, you can get your friends to smoke it for you if you've got a back pain. Do we want to go down that road?
Well, whether it gets killed or not will depend on the votes in the Parliament. We're not a majority. We need to remember that all the time. So we've yet to have our own caucus discussion about how exactly we'll deal with that bill, but it does amount to sort of doctors driving doctor-approved decriminalisation, which is probably a bit broader than actually what people think they want. When there's polling on this issue, it's quite often when people are responding positively, what the picture they tend to have in their mind, and those I've discussed with, and I don't want to pretend I've talked to everybody, which is someone who is in real discomfort and pain, for whom this would make a difference. Now, generally the way we deal with that situation is there are drugs and medicines available that have been through clinical trials, and some of the cannabis-based drugs have been and are certified, are regulated medicines, and I don't think there's any reason why we should be concerned about that. So I think you've got most people who want the situation where it's available if it's going to be effective, and the normal processes that we apply to that are the clinical processes that regulate all the drugs. Then I think there's another group of people who would see this bill as a crowbar for opening the door on loose leaf marijuana. So we've got to make sure that whatever debate happens, even if we're against it and the bill goes forward, that there's clarity about whether we're trying to meet the needs of people for whom, of course, you would have compassion and want them to have access to the medicines that will assist them on the one hand, or whether you're just trying to actually just decriminalise more broadly on the other hand, which is a debate you can have, but you should be open about it and not use a medical smokescreen. So, and I think you would find most people partial to finding a better, if there are better solutions for those for whom it has a big impact, then let's have a look at those.
Okay. Could we deal with one issue that you also covered in your first media conference, and it's this area of marriage.
You paid a lot of attention to that media conference, didn't you?
It's my segue, they call it.
Everyone else has forgotten it.
You voted against civil unions in 2004. In 2005, you voted for the definition of marriage to be one man, one woman. You voted against same-sex marriage in 2013. You've been pretty consistent. Thank you for that. At your first media conference... At your first media conference, you said, and I quote, "I would probably vote differently now. I don't think it's a threat to anyone else's marriage. It's an affirmation of the concept." What happened?
Well, what I said. I mean, I accept that, the law's changed. It is how it is. I mean, there's some ironies. It's interesting that in this context, everyone's very positive about marriage, whereas in the broader context, there's a lot less of it happening. But I mean, my position is what it was there. That is, the people have taken up the option. I don't believe it affects my marriage or those people who choose to marry. I think absolutely believe there's benefits from stable, committed marriage of a man and a woman. There's clearly people who believe there's benefits from the stable, committed gay marriage. So I'm not, setting out to reverse it or change it, except that it's there.
Do you personally still define marriage as one man, one woman?
Well, you've got to. Well, that's
just personally.
That's my definition of it.
That's
yeah.
your personal.
So you got to remember though what goes on here. This is about a government system for registering relationships. I happen to be married in the Catholic Church, which has a view about marriage and what it constitutes, and the registration of that marriage happens to be a requirement of government. It's not the requirements of government aren't at the core of my marriage. What I think is important here is that there's a kind of broad tolerance of my version of marriage as well, and I think that's pretty much the case.
But I think as we observed that media conference, if you had said, "Look, the law has changed. I accept that the law has changed. I still personally believe that marriage is one man on one woman," but you said, "I would probably vote differently now. Did you mean to say that?
Yes, I did. Yeah, I said it, and I said it, and I meant it.
So if a bill was introduced by another political party that says we're going to restore marriage back to one man, one woman, you would vote against it?
Well, I mean, I think that's pretty hypothetical. I can't imagine that that's going to happen, actually.
You never be surprised by Winston?
Well, I think sometimes he surprises himself.
You see, because my next question is, will you support a bill to extend marriage to allow polygamy and group marriage? I'm assuming that's an oppose.
No, that's right, I wouldn't.
But see, I would then throw it back at you, well, it's not a threat to your marriage.
I think that, I mean, these issues are always about where the boundary falls, because, you know, if we all lived perfect lives according to crystal clear principles, you wouldn't even need the law. But we don't all live that way, and politicians are no exception. No guarantees of virtue, that's for sure. So it's always about the community deciding the breadth of what it regards as acceptable behaviour, and always in this balance of the extent to which I can make choices in a free society without affecting someone else. And it's a bit like, you know, the drinking age. Why is it 18 or why is it 20, and how come we argue over it so much? Because in principle, why does the age make any difference? Well, we have big arguments about whether it's 18 or 20. And I think but the same with the state definition of a relationship, that's changed over time, reflects to a large extent community preferences, and as a politician and a legislator, you're inevitably part of those arguments. And I think that you can draw all sorts of implications from what might happen if the state moves away, as it has, from a definition of marriage of men and women. A lot of those are, I think, theoretical, outside the bounds of what our community would regard as acceptable and reasonable, and are unlikely to surface in my lifetime as legislative possibilities.
Because it leads on to the next question, should the government promote marriage full stop? For example, we've released 2 reports on child poverty and child abuse and looked at family structure, and one of the safest places for children to live in is in a home where mum and dad are married, and it's also one of the least likely places to be struggling financially for there to be child poverty. You know, breakdown of family, bad formation of families, huge risk factors for both. So should the state be promoting marriage?
Well, I think it's got some higher priority tasks first. I mean, the analysis you present is pretty clear cut. I mean, if kids are in a household where there's parents married or at least in a long-term relationship and work, then their prospects are much better. And at the other extreme, you've got, as I think I said at the start, thousands of kids where they don't have either of those things. And the evidence is pretty clear that while some of them will get on fine, more of them will struggle. So I would say the first thing the government needs to do is to work out how to interact with those households in a way that gives them some opportunity, or supports them in the opportunity to rebuild resilience, to rebuild structure, and hopefully to rebuild the kind of relationships that are going to protect children in the way that, and protect them and provide them opportunities in the way that you've described. Getting into a campaign promoting marriage, I think, would be a big distraction, because it would just bring out a whole lot of sort of philosophical arguments over whether the government should have a view. What does it mean by that? I think our top priority is for the government to stop, for government agency, even with good intentions, to stop undermining what are already brittle households with random and chaotic interventions in a way that means people find it very hard to build trust in each other, let alone in the government, or build the protective environment that their children deserve. And we spend quite a lot of time on this in recent years.
You see, two of the, and I know as Minister of Finance, you were involved in these things. We did a poll a couple of years ago, 76% support for income splitting for parents, and also there was strong support for paid parental leave as well. I mean, I guess with the paid parental leave, I was trying to figure out, were you opposed to it overall, philosophically, or is it just a financial issue of whether a country can afford that type of thing? Because you see, what I see is you have a family who have a young child. If the young child is put into childcare, $1.7 billion every year on that. If mum chooses to stay at home and nurture that child through those first 1,000 days, which the Brainwave Trust says is crucial, nothing. No income splitting, no subsidy. We discriminate against those families. So I guess there's a couple of questions wrapped up in there. Why not income splitting? Why not paid parental leave? And why not actually giving parents the choice to choose what arrangement they choose that works best for their family, whether they choose early childhood education or whether they choose to stay home?
Well, first, you're not quite right that if they stay home, they get nothing. There's a big system of family support working for families, which has grown over the years, and in the last budget, we're going to align the rates, so you're getting up around $90 to $100 per week per child for people on lower incomes. So that's done on household income, so it does take account of the fact that that if it's got a lower income because one of them stopped work, then they qualify. And in fact, we need to make further changes to that because it's too hard for people to know what their entitlement is, and in the next year or two we'll be able to make it much clearer to them. So at the moment, only about 1% of families actually get the right amount that they should get. Half of them get too much and have to pay it back, and half of them don't get enough and don't pick up their entitlement. With respect to the other issues you raised, I think we certainly do support paid maternity leave, and that's been expanding in sort of 2 to 4 week chunks, and as we've got positive choices as a country because we've got surpluses, other countries don't have the opportunity to expand those sort of entitlements. We do, and in the budget we set a direction for that, and if we can keep going with some sustained economic success, then we can go and do all that again, and we can deal with the paid maternity.
So in principle, you'd be happy to get to 6 months if the country.
Yeah, in principle, we're happy to see it expanded.
What about income splitting? Why the opposition to income splitting?
Well, because it's a pretty blunt instrument for getting the resource to those who need it. You can, so for instance, if you split the incomes, because of the way the tax system works, people with too high incomes get the most benefit. People with too low incomes get a lot less benefit, and people with one low income can't split. They get no benefit, for instance, if one of the parents hasn't been working. So the working for families is a better way of getting the cash to where it's actually needed. So that's, the income splitting has some benefits, but it just misses the target too much, which is why we've stuck with the working for families. We had a pretty good look at it over the years. I mean, Peter Dunn in 2008 was campaigning on it. There was a whole lot of work done, so the numbers, the analysis has all been done, and that's what got us to the conclusion to stick with the working for families.
Can we deal with a perennial favourite, the anti-smacking law? Your predecessor, John Key, said, if I see good parents being criminalised, I'll change the law. Public lawyer May Chen says, yes, good parents are being criminalised. I guess the question is, and we saw a poll during the week or research out of Auckland University saying that mums are still smacking, and polling saying that up to 2/3 of people would flout the law. What's your benchmark for fixing the law, or is it a no-go area? Because it's still hugely unpopular, isn't it?
Well, I wouldn't say it's hugely unpopular. I mean, I can't remember when it was
75%?
When it was last raised, and I get around a fair bit. But I think, again, this is another point about the relationship between what law Parliament passes and how people behave, because it's not as simple as the polling question. And look, my response around the smacking law is I wish that it had been as effective as its proponents said it would be, and why we voted for it. And I am concerned about the survey that says there's people using smacking a lot, and we haven't seen, certainly at the extreme end, from what I can see, much shift now on abuse of children, because we know that the circumstances in which that occurs are not a group of people sitting around talking about the human rights of the child, right? They're in sort of chaotic, drug-fueled, alcohol-fueled, isolated kind of households. And I wish the smacking law had the impact. So I think it's as much a statement of direction. I'm sure it acts as a restraint for some parents, and that's a good thing. The more serious issue is digging into where we are going now, and that is much more effectively and openly addressing the issues, the practice of family violence in New Zealand, which is still far too high. And it's, as I said, a group of people for whom, doesn't matter what law you pass, they don't have the self-restraint or the respect for the humanity of the other people, particularly the children. And we have to get in there with a much stronger mix of better enforcement of the law and sensible support for those families. And if I can just give you one little example, because I've used it a bit. I was shown a video last year of this guy talking about violence in his household, and he'd had 87 police call-outs to the house, which makes you wonder why we keep doing that. You'd think after the first 50 times, someone might have thought, perhaps this isn't working. But we got to 87. Imagine how much resource that chewed up. And then someone decided to do something about it. They found the relation in his family who he would listen to. And on the video, he's saying, well, last year we had one call out. I've found out there's other ways of dealing with my issues. I used this story at a speech I gave just 2 or 3 days ago. And one of the women came up to me who had shown me the video and said, he's now got a job. Right, so you just know that, and he hadn't had a job for decades. So you just know that that's working. Now the anti-smacking law, whether it's there or not, wouldn't make much difference. So look, we're not going to push it back. I think, gives a pretty clear sense of direction that the use of physical violence is not acceptable. And while people might say they don't like it, I don't think people want New Zealand to now turn around and say we're removing this piece of law so that parents can smack their kids.
So after the election, you may be sitting at a coalition table with Winston Peters, and New Zealand First have said it's their policy to, well, we want to clarify that this afternoon, either to repeal it or to have a referendum on it. How will you deal with that?
Well, one of the reasons we're not trying to, there's a couple of reasons why we're not trying to negotiate with anyone before an election. One is we haven't got the voters' mandate to do so. We have to earn that, and that's a lot of hard work ahead of us. Secondly, New Zealand First is casting around for pretty much any itch it can scratch, because some of the usual issues that they pursue, like the idea that the provinces are doing very poorly as economies, simply aren't correct. So they haven't got that grievance, they've got to go and find some other ones. So it's too hard to predict how long that list is going to be, because so far I think they've clocked up 5 billion of promises, or just which ones they take seriously themselves.
We've just established a new Child, Youth and Family Ministry for Vulnerable Children, and one of the things that people were calling for was an independent complaints authority. similar to what the police have, an independent complaints authority. Why it was never put into the legislation? I mean, do you personally think that there should be a independent complaints authority when you've got social workers able to make such life-changing decisions for families?
I think it certainly needs a lot of oversight. I'm not exactly sure what people mean by an independent complaints authority. I mean, the police, even the police one, doesn't actually substitute for the decisions of the police dealing with the situation. It can later on look at it and say whether they did the right thing or the wrong thing. Often, I've found that often what people mean when you're dealing with these cases as an MP is they want someone else who they think will make a different decision. So we can't go down that road, because in the end someone has to decide and be held responsible for it. We've built into the new ministry quite a lot of independence, and in particular the bit I've seen that has having the most impact even before it started is young people who've been in the system. So you get these articulate 16, 17, 20-year-olds who were kids in care. I'm a great believer in listening to kids. I know they don't have fully developed judgment, but they know what happened to them. And actually they know a fair bit about why, because if it's bad, they've thought about it a lot. So it doesn't go to the extent some would like, but I think it's important, and what's in there is going to give us a great deal more ability to watch what's happening. And we know that people will make better decisions if they know those decisions are open to scrutiny.
We've just had a fairly harrowing presentation on pornography and the impact it's having in society, the impact it's having on our children, what's becoming the norm. 22,335 people signed a petition in 6 weeks calling for an expert panel to investigate this. And polling says that 90% say online depictions of sexual violence are moderately or very harmful to society. And you were asked about this expert inquiry, whether there should be a panel, and your response was, clearly there's been a big increase in access to pornography through the internet. We don't see evidence of it being a fast-growing or overwhelming problem. I'm sorry you didn't see the presentation, because the research says exactly the opposite. Why wouldn't you at least consider saying, yeah, let's have an expert panel, let's get an independent advisory group to see just how bad the problem, I mean, look, you may find out there's not a problem, I doubt it. But why not have that expert panel?
Well, look, we should always be open to evidence about the impact on, negative social behaviour, right? I think we should always be open to that, because we find over time things people didn't think mattered, it turns out they mattered. So in that sense, I don't object. Certainly wouldn't stand in the way of people presenting their evidence. I think that's an important part of public debate. And I'm sure it will show that there are harmful impacts for some people around pornography. I mean, I've got no interest or tolerance of it.
But I guess we're asking for your blessing, if I use that term, for there to be an expert panel, because at the moment it's only the government who is really standing in the way. We've asked all party leaders, they're all behind it, except the official word from your advisors, Jamie Lee Ross, said your government doesn't support an inquiry. Is he correct? Has he got that wrong?
Well, we're not setting out to set up an inquiry. That doesn't stop people having views about it or having the experts present their views. I mean, that's exactly what goes on with drug issues, with family issues.
Well, people call porn a new drug because of its addictive nature.
Yeah. I think in the broader context, the challenging bit with this is what you do about it. And if I can make a point, which I think is a consistent theme here, where we might have a slight difference of view. If you're looking to government to be the arbiter of morality, you are going to be constantly, consistently disappointed. What drives, in my view, constructive social behaviour is our families, our iwi, our churches, our communities the way that together we put pressure on people at times or support them when they need it, or make it clear in all sorts of informal civil life what works and what doesn't.
But laws
and
do
in that
reinforce those values, don't they? I mean, one of the questions...
So here's the proposition, Bob. Let's ban pornography.
No, but I don't think... I mean, if you could, but I don't think you can.
There's my point.
Okay.
There's my point.
So what people are saying is...
No, hang on. I think there's my point. So it's fine to have an inquiry. I've got no particular objection to an inquiry. Then your question will be, well, what's the government going to do about it? And I just don't want to mislead you that the government has got some simple answer to this energised mix of the internet and everyone having access to it and the sheer volume of material, I'm told, that's on it, of this nature. So the discussion I think is more important is not so much whether you have a bunch of experts. I think you and I can probably predict what they would say. It's how we talk with our parents and children about how they deal with the fact that they've always got the choice 24 hours a day to be viewing and influenced by pornography. And I think that is a pretty important discussion.
But some people see government regulatory groups as part of the problem. The Advertising Standards Authority, the Broadcasting Standards Authority. One of the questions we put in the poll was, should the government require internet providers to filters to block pornographic material? So the default setting. And 81% support. 91% said it was too easy for under 18s to access online pornography. That does need a governmental response, because the government needs to put requirements on businesses who just want to make money out of porn. Mm-hmm. And
yeah,
so
look,
I guess as families, we're asking the government to back up families.
Well, and I think those are legitimate discussions to be had, right? Because there are there's more and more discussion about what is acceptable material on the internet, and this focus on Google and Facebook about what they do and how they do it. So I wouldn't rule out the discussion on the basis of defending anything. I'm just wanting to make sure that we're clear about how the reality of accessibility and what in the long run is going to make the most difference, which is the community at large deciding that this type of objectification, particularly of women, is harmful, and that going with it is not going to lead to the kind of society that we want. So, but happy to have the discussion about the regulatory issues. I mean, these come up all the time, don't they, about what's acceptable on primetime TV, for instance. And does what's on TV set the tone now, or what's on the internet? So, look, I wouldn't, we can have the discussion about whether to have the expert group. Happy for that discussion to continue.
We're virtually out of time, so I'd just like to ask you two remaining questions. One is slightly loaded, and it's about Family First charitable status. But I don't ask it for our benefit. It's simply an overriding question. I guess I'm asking it on behalf of Greenpeace as well. Is that, do you believe there's a place for groups in society to be arguing at the top of the cliff about policy that affects families? That you have the bottom of the cliff, you have the coalface organisations, but you also have the ones at the top that are doing the research and are speaking and making submissions, talking with policy makers. They're non-profit. For some reason, they're gunning for us because we believe things like marriage is one man, one woman. Do you think that's right? Is there a place for...
Well, if they were gunning for you on that basis, then the people doing that would, of course, have to be removed from the public service, because the law is not anything to do with what the advocacy is. So look, we have 500-year-old charities law. It's gone through, there's been a lot of focus on trying to clean up the charity sector because a few too many people were using it as a vehicle for unacceptable behaviour. You've come up against this legal argument, as I understand it, about sort of advocacy versus actual good works, and the charitable definition is focused around good works, or whatever the term actually is. And until or unless that law changes, then the people overseeing it have to administer it without fear or favour or any colour to the political argument, or the political position that people take. There's many people like myself who appreciate the contribution Family First makes. What makes our political world work is people who take views and push them and push us around and make us take positions and make us talk about funding or about regulation of pornography or whatever, particularly that, deal with issues that we find difficult or push us hard on the environment as happens as well. So until the law changes, that's how it is. And I think the law reflects 500 years of wisdom, and that is that the fundamental component of charity is doing good, not just talking about it.
My final question is around the Christian faith, and it's basically in New Zealand. Do you think it still has a unique and special role? In other words, do the Judeo-Christian values that undermine this country, are they still relevant? For example, is it still okay for us to have Bible in schools? Does that ultimately come back to a school to decide and parents to decide rather than the court to decide? What's your position on that? Because of obviously our understanding of your own personal faith journey.
Oh yeah, I think it still does have a particular important role. One of it's historical, and that is that a lot of what are now seen as human rights type arguments are actually based in a pretty core Christian foundation that you should respect the humanity of every single person, and in that sense everyone is equal. I think though there's always still a relevance today, even though we've got a lot fewer people who say they're religious of any sort. In fact, I think we're probably one of the lowest in the Western world for that.
In that way.
And that is that even I found over time that people still regard that what they sort of loosely term the churches, which includes a whole range of churches, not just the sort of traditional ones, as at least the holders of a moral toolbox that we want to dip into every now and again. So you will see, even if they're not religious, and at times of stress or concern, we sort of instinctively turn to the rituals and the deeper beliefs around meaning. If I just think of going to the memorial service for the victims of the Christchurch earthquake when we opened the new memorial there. Well, you can't help having sort of elements of the sacred involved in it. And increasingly those are underpinned here in New Zealand by Māori and Pacific belief. It's not uncommon. I see this in children's sports where you'll see teams praying before games. As far as I know, it's not illegal.
Let's keep it that way.
It seems to be, it's something that's quite acceptable in that group of people. And in that sense, I think today's young people are more tolerant. That is, on the one hand, they're much less concerned about who's gay or who isn't. On the other hand, they're also much less concerned about who goes to church and who doesn't. Because there's actually quite a lot of young people who are active in church. So I think it will always play a role, even if that's unrecognised. Now, with respect to how I regard it, I'm a politician, we all have a conscience. Mine happens to be informed by the religion in which I've been brought up. And and whether that means I make better judgments, well, others will decide that. It's certainly no guarantee of virtue or wisdom, that's for sure. You just got to look at how churches sometimes behave. So, and it's not a threat to anybody.
Prime Minister, thank you for coming. Unlike other party leaders, you showed up. This is a family group. We would just say during the upcoming chaotic election season, we hope and pray that you get good quality family time during that period, because I'm sure it's going to be very chaotic. Would you please show your appreciation to the Prime Minister?